What's up, everybody? Happy Saturday afternoon to you. You're on with the Black Comic Lords, and I'm Paul. And with us today, here at BCL, we tend to do a lot of deep, in-depth interviews and topics of discussion and get into these deep dives and stuff. But at the end of the day, most of us got into comics because it's fun. We love to debate these characters. We love to debate verses. Who could win in a fight? This person versus this person. We love the complexity of having decades of history and continuity and seeing how it all meshes together. And unless you're an old head, sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming to have all the history that you have on many of these characters. And so you have to Google characters to find out what is this person? Who is this character? How do they fit into this universe? It can be daunting. It can be overwhelming. On YouTube, there are a lot of different YouTube creators, that do a pretty good job of explaining comics to all of us, both veterans and new people alike. And among the best on the net is Mr. Robert Jefferson of Comics Explained. I've been following him for a long time. I think one of the first videos that really got me excited about what he does is his love for Blue Marvel. He did a video explaining who is the Blue Marvel. One of the best ones I've ever seen, if not the best. And I ran into Robert a couple months ago at Orlando Art Expo, and he agreed to come on our show and just chop it up a bit about comics because they're fun. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Robert Jefferson of Comics Explained.
What's up, guys?
What's up? You're so damn chill, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, man. Yeah, pretty chill. I mean, I can get super excited sometimes. Don't get me wrong, man. Like, yeah, if it's like a story or like something that I have going on in life that's like really really exciting, yeah, I can get like super excitable. But yeah, I just love being chill, man. It's cool.
When you get excited in your videos, I can tell because you do this laugh where you go, "Oh."
Bro, that is not what I sound like.
I'm not doing it justice, but
No, you're good.
like
You're good.
when
It's
you get
okay.
excited, you can tell in your videos. Like some characters, you get really
Yeah,
into. I
yeah.
appreciate that. So, you know, tell us about yourself. How did you get into comics?
Ooh, well, it's kind of ironic because X-Men '97 is coming out. Yeah, I originally got into comics because of X-Men the animated series.
Right,
I guess it was a combination of things: X-Men the animated series, the old Batman the animated series, right? But like
right.
the comic book cartoon shows of the '90s, right? But X-Men the animated series was the one that I loved and still do love the most. Like myself and my girlfriend, we get into well, not really so much anymore, but we used to get in arguments or debates all the time about which one was better, X-Men the animated series or Batman the animated series. And I might spark up one of those debates just for the fun of it, just kind of rile her up a little bit. But she loved Batman the animated series. Um, but I used to watch X-Men with my dad. And it was like our thing, like every Saturday morning. I want to say it was like 11:30 a.m., 11 or 11:30 is when it used to come on. And yeah, we'd watch it every Saturday, like without fail. We were there.
Right.
And my dad got me he got me a couple of comics. He didn't get me anything related to X-Men, ironically enough. He got me this old Batman comic, and I can never remember what comic it was. Like, I can never remember what comic it was.
Do you
But then he
remember the
also got
story
me
at all,
Sovereign
or the
7.
characters?
Do what?
Do you remember the story or any of the characters of that comic?
Not a whole lot. In hindsight, I'm pretty sure it was during or it was after Nightfall, and it was during like John Paul Valley Batman. Well, I wouldn't really say after Nightfall because yeah, no, I wouldn't say it was after Nightfall because X-Men 90, let's see. X-Men the animated series was what, 1992? So
Yeah.
I'd say like 93, 94 is when I started getting into it seriously. Maybe more like 95. So yeah, around that time. In any event, yeah, it was a Batman story. And the only thing I remember is Batman had what looked like a claw for a hand, which sounds like Jean Paul Valley, right?
Hmm.
And so, like, yeah, it looked like those claw things that Jean Paul Valley had, like the sharp
Yeah, the gold
talons for
ones.
fingers. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And so, yeah, it's like one of the only things I can remember. Like he was supposedly drowning a guy in a sewer. I think I don't know. I mean, it's been over 20 years at this point. But well, the other comic that he got me was Sovereign 7 from Chris
Oh,
Claremont. And that comic was terrible. Like Sovereign 7 was awful. Like they tried to put power.
the cover was dope.
Like once you got into the comic, you were just kind of like, this kind of sucks, right? Like they put Power Girl on it to try to make it interesting, but like it just never, yeah. So I was like, I'm not digging either of these. And so I remember the first X-Men comic that I got, as cliche as it sounds, was X-Men Volume 2, issue number 1. Which ironically enough, actually up here, I have one of the variant covers for X-Men Volume 2. I technically have all 4, but I put the one with Magneto up here. And then I've got the original X-Men number 1, like Stanley and Jack Kirby. That one's autographed by Jim Lee. And then I've
Wow.
got Giant Size X-Men number 1, which is autographed by Jonathan Hickman. And then New Mutants number 1, which is technically not the Marvel graphic novel. That's the one that's worth a fortune, but the covers are identical. So a lot of people get thrown off. And then X Factor number 1 from Bob Layton in them. But yeah, like X-Men Volume 2, man, that was my intro into the X-Men. And because the 90s were like the event age, right? Like
Right.
Jim Lee had bailed and Rob Liefeld was gone, Chris Claremont was
McFarlane.
gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, for McFarlane, like all the top talent at Marvel at that point had basically like bailed. So they literally had like no one to really like write or draw the X-Men, right? I mean, they brought in like Lodell and Fabian DeSouza and so on and so forth, but still, like it was just kind of like event after event after event after event, because it was just kind of like, what else do we do? And it actually turned out to be one of the best eras to read X-Men as a kid. In this day and age, going back, it's an absolute nightmare. Right? Outside of like what is it, Executioner Song, right? Which was like, you have just a little logo at the top, right? Part 1, part 2, part 3, all that kind of stuff. You didn't really have comics the way you have them now, right? Which is, Avengers versus X-Men, part one, like the main story that you can easily follow, and then like all the tie-ins. Then you get like Age of Apocalypse, where everything gets put on hold for 6 months, and you just got to figure out the reading order on your own, and
Right.
just go from there. But yeah, so what got me into comics was X-Men the animated series. My dad tried to get me into DC Comics, did not work, had no interest in it, and then ultimately became a fan of the X-Men. And just because of the nature of the event age in the 90s, it got me into everything else, right? And so while I've read Thor and Fantastic Four and Avengers and I remember characters like Threnody, right, like the girlfriend of Nate Gray from way back in the day. But to me, it was like the X-Men comics were always the comics that I go back to. Right. It was just, I don't know. It's just in the world of comics, it's home, if that makes any sense. So
no, it makes perfect sense. I think the X-Men was really where I got into team superhero comics. Before that, I oddly enough was really into G.I. Joe, Iron Man, and Star Wars comics. And then I ran into a friend in middle school. It was like, hey, try out these X-Men comics. And from like the first issue, it was the Chris Claremont run. I was hooked. Hooked. Storm, Wolverine. It was just too much. I absolutely fell in love with the X-Men at that period. So how did you transition from your passion from comics into podcasting?
Taking me down memory lane. I was at a job that wasn't too fulfilling. I love the people, but the job was a bit of a struggle. And I just wasn't really at a great place in life. And ironically enough, I always liked the idea of being a history teacher, right? I've always had a fascination for history. And honestly, in the world of comics, that's always what interested me the most. Like, I love the characters, I love the teams, but like as I've grown older, like, give me stuff about like Phil Seuling, Jim Galton, Sheldon Feinberg, even moving away from the Marvel brass, right, and going back to like old school guys, Wally Wood, Bill Mantlo, Peter David, giving me like the super old school. Oh my God, what was his name? Anyway, I can't remember his name now, but yeah, like the super old school, guys, like give me the history of like the comic book industry. Like that's what really interested me. But it was one of those things where it was kind of like, all right, like I love comic books. I've always wanted to be a history teacher. And so I just took a shot in the dark, fired up Comics Explained, which back then was Marvel Explained, and made a video on
Well, we seem to have had a technical difficulty. Let's see if we can get him back. Looks like his internet got disconnected. So everyone bear with us for a second. Derek, you work on getting him back. And in the interim, we'll take a quick commercial break. How about that?
This week in Black History, Black Comic Lord celebrates the artistry of Dennis Cowan. Dennis Cowan is a comic book artist with a flair for naturalism. If I didn't know any better, I thought the brother lived and breathed in brick-walled alleys, inhaling the pollution of the city streets and exhaling with pictures of agony and anguish. You see, it's hard to describe Mr. Cowan's art, so I'm forced to use a ghetto analogy. Dennis Cowan's art is like fish and grits. It's not first on the menu, but you're glad you spotted it. Visually, it tastes good and your eyes will be filled. Yes, filled, I say, filled with detail. They say the devil is in the details, but Dennis be like, hold my beer, because the brother crafts scenes and faces where it makes you wonder, did he miss anything? Each panel is filled with action, and though pictures cannot physically move, Dennis Cowan shows and proves that they actually can. From Batman to The Question to the Black Panther and others, Dennis Cowan's art speaks like Terminator X speaks with his hands. That makes him a bad man and worthy to be celebrated. Salute the living legend that is Dennis Cowan, a Black history legend. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And until next time, peace.
What's up, comic fam? It's your boy Paul with an exclusive look at a dope new section of our blackcomiclords.net website. Head to the site, click on Black Indie Comics for your selection of the dopest black comics around. And if you're a black comic creator and you want to be added to the site, send us your link with a copy of your logo so we can add it in there. But be patient. We're getting there. We're getting there. Much respect to all of you. All right.
No idea what happened. No idea what happened. Like everything.
It was a conspiracy by the secret government agencies.
I guess, man. It was just like your video's done, your audio's done, and then it was just like boom, and I was just like, wow. So it all just implodes. Okay, that's awesome. What a way to start this podcast.
So you were talking about how you got into podcasting and how you were sort of disillusioned with your job and want to do something different.
Yeah. So I fired up a video, made a video on Jason Wingard, which was that I mean, the video's still there, but it's just this really basic video. It's just like me talking into a microphone about like, Jason Wingard, and you can manipulate the five senses or whatever. And the first few videos just were not very good. And then a buddy of mine, Sean, was like, he comes to me and he says, you should put the comic book panels in so people can see what you're referencing when you're talking about the history of characters. And that's what blew up the channel. Like it was kind of like three things. It was that it was making a video on the Scarlet Witch when they announced her for Age of Ultron. And then it was right when they announced Captain America 3 Civil War, I had just finished the Civil War story arc on the channel. And so people like just went hunting for it. And they found like my channel had like the whole story and like that absolutely skyrocketed. But I don't know, YouTube back then, man, it was the comic book YouTube scene back then, it was so different. And it's really interesting sort of looking back at the way things were then versus looking at the way things are now. Because back then you didn't, I mean, not to toot my own horn. I don't necessarily like being too.
What time frame are you talking about?
Oh, I'm talking about back when I first started.
Like how many?
So we're
years
talking
ago?
about a decade, a little over a decade ago.
Okay.
Which is still kind of blows me away that I've been doing this for over a decade at this point. But back then, you had like three major comic book YouTube channels. You had Variant Comics, Comic Book Girl 19, and Comic Book Cast.
Yeah, I remember Comic Girl 19. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you had just a whole boatload of other, small little comic book YouTube channels that were getting like 2-3 views a video, and they had like 40 subscribers, and that kind of thing. But like 99% of them were just like a person like this, like the way I'm sitting here, maybe on their bed or something like that, and just saying like, here's the newest issue of Batman, and here's what I liked about it, and that kind of thing. And so the long and short of it is that there was no one really doing what I was doing, what I started doing on YouTube at that point in time, which was I'm going to sit you down and I'm going to make you an expert on this comic book character, or I'm going to make you an expert on this comic book team, mostly Marvel, right? Which it's kind of funny how it all goes full circle because I'm basically still doing Marvel at this point. But there wasn't really anybody doing that. And the funny thing is myself and Comic Storian, we launched our channels probably within 3 months of each other. And I don't remember which one of us came first, but within 3 months of each other, we both had YouTube channels. And I remember reaching out to him, right? Because when I was trying to grow, before it all blew up, right? When I was trying to grow, and I still credit CNanners for this, I reached out to him on Twitter. He was an OG Call of Duty YouTuber that I used to watch back in the day. And I was like, hey man, like I'm trying to grow on YouTube. Like how do I grow? And he was like, network and make friends. And I was like, cool. So I just started like canvassing around the comic book YouTube scene, and I hit up Benny over at Comic Store. And I was like, hey man, like, are you down for like, collaborating in some way? And like, he hit me back, and it just happened to be that he saw my message back when you had YouTube messages back in the day before YouTube axed it. And right. He responds. And he was like, yeah, man, and so he and I ended up creating like the Weekly Pool podcast. And then I want to say, I don't remember the exact time frame, but I want to say shortly after we launched it, we brought in Sal from Comic Pop. And you know what? I take back my previous statement. I would say that Sal was probably the only person doing, he was doing kind of what I was doing before I started doing it, to a degree. The difference is that instead of making videos where he's kind of directly addressing the audience and is like, this is what, like, I'm going to make you an expert on this character. He had like Ben and Ethan and like he was teaching them about comic books. And while the audience was more of an observer of like the conversation, they would still learn kind of along with Ben and Ethan, but they weren't really the target audience in terms of who Sal was talking to. But still, yeah. So we grabbed Sal, and the three of us, we launched the whole weekly pool. We launched Weekly Pool podcast way back when. And that I would say was another thing that really kind of blew it all up, was just kind of cross-pollinating between the three of us, because I'd get Sal's fans, Sal would get my fans, I would get Benny's fans, Benny would get my fans, and Sal would get mine and Benny's fans, and that kind of thing. And so it all just sort of, mixed around. And the funny thing was it grew. I mean, my channel grew astronomically fast.
You're at like what, 2 million some odd followers now?
Oh yeah, but I'd say for about the last 5 years or so, the growth was nothing like what it was when it first launched. I mean, it still grows, right? But I want to say that at peak, I was probably hitting 50,000 subscribers a month in terms of growth. I mean, it was crazy how fast it was growing. I mean, it was nuts. I hit 1 million subscribers within 3 years, maybe.
Wow.
Of YouTube channel, maybe 4. But I hit it super fast. Like it was crazy how quick it happened. Because we basically created a niche that just didn't exist. And
to that point, if you're watching this video right now and you're digging the channel, please hit like and subscribe below.
Yeah. Make sure you guys follow Black Comic Nerds. Yeah, these guys are dope. But yeah, because and that's the crazy thing is nowadays. Well, I don't even know if I'd really say like now. I would say probably like a year ago. Probably within since maybe like 2021, right? So for about 2021 to 2023, about that 2-year period, maybe 3, depending on how you look at it, that it was very, very easy to grow when you had like YouTube Shorts. Right, because you could like fire up shorts, and YouTube was just pushing them out there. They were just promoting shorts like crazy, because they were trying to catch up with TikTok. And nowadays they've backed off, right? But I would say that the single biggest thing that really carried my channel to the level of success that it was at were comic book movies. Right, because when Marvel comes out and they say, okay, guys, like here's phase 3, of the MCU, we get Black Panther and we get this and we get that, all that kind of stuff, and it's like, okay, guys, well, here's the story where Black Panther gets the Infinity Gauntlet, and here's the story, because and like leading up to Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, anything with Infinity Gauntlet in the title, that video blew up. It didn't matter what it was, right? That video would explode, right? I could just be like, Captain America stares at the Infinity Gauntlet in a jewelry store for 2 hours, and like that video is going to explode, right? It's because people wanted to get their hands and learn anything they could about the Infinity Gauntlet, right? Because that's what Infinity War and Endgame were based on.
It really was the perfect zeitgeist of the decade before, with the MCU blowing up, the movies gaining popularity, people in the mainstream becoming familiar with these characters, trying to get into comics. Then we had the pandemic. And then everyone's locked at their houses and getting into comics even more and watching YouTube videos.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it is, because, and this, like, comic books are oftentimes, I think, seen by the general audience as a very unapproachable thing. Very, very difficult to get into, which is one of the reasons why my channel succeeded so well, because it's like, hey, here's Cyclops of the X-Men, right? Like, I'm going to break his character down in 30 minutes and make you an expert, right?
I love that last Cyclops video you did, by the way. That was dope.
Which one was it? Oh, the one where he dominates, Avengers versus X-Men. Yeah, like he just like crushes the X-Men and the Avengers. Yeah, there's been a few characters who have done that. Cable did it, and X Sanction. And then Cyclops did it, and it's what was it? There was Brian Michael Bendis's New Avengers, Volume 2. Who was the Sentry? Yeah, like the Void. The Void. It wasn't even just the Avengers and the X-Men, right? Like the Void dominated the Avengers, X-Men, Fantastic Four, the entirety of the superhero community. They were powerless to stop that guy. It was one heck of a way to introduce or to really bring back Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee's story, from
with the exception of our boy, the Blue Marvel.
Well, Blue Marvel wasn't around at that point, but no, I don't know. The Void probably would destroy Blue Marvel, if I'm being honest. As much as I want to say no,
he would ultimately, yes.
Yeah, I think he would ultimately destroy Adam Brashear.
I was trying to segue into the discussion about your Blue Marvel video, because that's what really was like, man, I love that video. That was great.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, right? So I stumbled across Adam Brashear. I had never heard of his character. Like I stumbled across this character some number of years after he had already been created and introduced. And I don't remember how I came across the character, but I was just like, I'm going to read about this. And with like the first issue, I was immersed. Right now, to Kevin's credit, Kevin Grievous, the guy who wrote it, there was a lot of himself that was put in the character. Right.
Yes.
If you go back and you look up Kevin Grievous as an actor and as a director, as a writer, and even before that, look at like his college career. Kevin went to an HBCU. Adam Brashear went to an HBCU. Right. Adam Brashear has advanced degrees in differing forms of science. Kevin Grievous has advanced degrees in differing forms of science. So he very much put himself in that character. But he is also a guy who has a very deep knowledge of Marvel. And initially, I wasn't aware because I mean, it's not to really take anything away from comic book writers or anything like that, but a lot of comic book creators kind of get into comics at a point in time, and then they just sort of go forward from there, right? And so, if you sit down a comic book artist and you say, okay, like let's talk about the significant contributions of Mark Silvestri to the art style of the X-Men, and how Mark Silvestri paved the way for Will Spertasio and Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane and all those more exotic artists that are kind of hallmarks of like the 1990s. They won't necessarily know that. They'll be aware of it and they know who those creators are, right? If for no other reason than just the legacy they left behind. But they won't really know how those artists compare to like Dave Cockrum or John Byrne, or Kurt Swan or somebody like that, like the significance of their legacies and how it kind of everything builds on everything else. But I'm reading, right, like what is it, issue 1 or issue 2, the one where Tony Stark goes to see General Krutz or whatever his name was, the former guy who was part of Kennedy's cabinet. And they talk about like the nature of Adam Brashear, and they talk about how the government was afraid of him and all that kind of stuff. And Stark makes this offhanded remark and he says, so that's how Project Wide Awake was created, right? A whisper in the dark. And I was like, okay, so this guy knows his stuff. He's pulling out the stops, because Wide Awake was a very, very old school concept in the world of comics, in the world of Marvel. I mean, that's the old, like Chris Claremont, right? Like, do you know where your children is? Do you know about Project Wide Awake, Paul? Are you aware of that?
Project Wide Awake.
Mm-hmm. You'll probably see it in the MCU. Wide Awake, it was very much a background concept, right? But when you pick out the pieces from Chris Claremont's run and you pick out stuff from like Grant Morrison's X-Men, and just all these different runs that different people had, right? Where they involved.
Wasn't it part of the Super Soldier program?
It is not. I mean, it is, but it isn't. Weapons Plus was all Super Soldier stuff.
Right.
Weapon 1, Captain America, all the way up to Weapon 10 with Wolverine and the ones that came after Phantom X and Step for Cuckoos and all that kind of stuff. Project Wide Awake was this initiative where the government had come to see mutants as like a credible threat. Initially, it started with Bolivar Trask, and with Grant Morrison's run, he invoked like John Sublime and guys like that. But still, the old school stuff was like Bolivar Trask, right? The creator of the Sentinels and stuff like that. Yeah, and he's like, these mutants are a dangerous, incredible threat. And in the Blue Marvel comic, Bolivar Trask is like, this Blue Marvel may be one of these mutants, because at that point the federal government is like exploring all possibilities of what kind of threat this guy may present, because as you know in the story, that when the country learns that like Adam Brashear is a black guy, this is all in the midst of the civil rights movement, right? So on one hand, you have members of the black community who are like, you have to join the civil rights cause. And in the comic, it goes as far as to state that like the black community kind of turned against Adam Brashear because he refused to side with the civil rights movement. I'm a protector of the world, not one particular community within the world. And then on the other side, you had the federal government who's like, we don't know what this guy's going to do. Like, what if he sides with the black community and then just decides to topple the U.S. government? Like, what are we going to do? We can't stop this guy, And so they were kind of exploring all directions on how to handle him. And Wide Awake was like one of those. And so by the time, at least with Bolivar Trask is kind of how it began. By the time it reached the peak of like, its operation, if you want to call it that, right? Complete implementation. Project Wide Awake was just a federal government initiative to contain and control the mutant threat that stretched from the highest echelons of the government, right? The president of the United States, all the way down to like state and local sheriff's offices, right? If you see something, say something, like that kind of a thing. It was very, very Orwellian, right? Like 1984 type stuff, and it was very, very sketch, but it was kind of this end comic book allegory to like what happens when you have a government that targets a particular ethnic group, on whatever merit that government chooses to use to say like they are individuals worth targeting. And so it was a really, really cool ideology. But that's when I knew like this guy knows his stuff about comic books, because there's no like Project Wide Awake one shot, right? It's not like a 6-issue story, where it's like Project Wide Awake, the miniseries, right? That doesn't exist.
It's an
right?
ongoing thing that's been going on in the X-Men books for a while.
Yeah, mutant registration and all that kind of stuff. Like it requires you to have a strong understanding of especially Chris Claremont's X-Men, to like really, really grasp his X-Men run. And that's
to
what
some
I was
degree,
like,
you could even say Orcus. What's going on with Orcus is kind of a byproduct of that.
Orcus is very much a Project Wide Awake. It's less a government program and more just like, this is the guy out there, right? Like that group there is who we want to go against. What made Project Wide Awake so dangerous and so impactful is you had things like Valerie Cooper and the Commission on Superhuman Activities, right? And you had just like these nameless, faceless, unidentified organizations. And so even if you had a story in the old Stan Lee, Jack Kirby run where the X-Men defeat Bolivar Trask and his Sentinel program is handed over to Stephen Lang, right, who created the Sentinels that from like X-Men the animated series, right? Like those are the Sentinels that everybody recognizes, right? Those are the Stephen Lang variant, right? You have like the X-Men that go and defeat Stephen Lang. Like it's just defeating a guy, right? Like it's just a dude, but the entire project still remains. And it's like Skynet from Terminator. There is no central core, right? There's no central Project Wide Awake organization to go after and to defeat. So,
would you consider some of the more benign or albeit even benevolent aspects of things they've done, such as you mentioned Val Cooper? Val Cooper was kind of leading the project with the X Factor, the government sanctioned X Factor group.
Yeah,
with
the old Strong Guy and Havoc.
Right,
and
right,
like that
right.
Yeah.
And they were in essence a government X-Men team. So
they were.
One could argue that Project Wide Awake offset of that concept of we need protection from the mutants was sort of the government sanctioned mutant groups. Would you consider that to be part of Wide Awake?
To a degree, I would. The only issue that you run into with that is because Chris Claremont left, a lot of the plot threads that he had were just sort of left hanging. It's the reason why, like the legacy virus in the 90s, it's just like supposed to be an allegory for like AIDS in like the mutant community. And then like initially it's just like, how in the world do we combat these things? Combat this like this really deadly virus that's killing mutants. And then by the time you get to like the late 1990s, it's just kind of like, oh dude, we forgot about that. Okay, let's write a story where like Beast comes up with a cure, but then like Colossus has to take the cure, but it's going to kill him. But then he saves the mutant community. Done. Right. And like that's it. Right. Yeah. So it's like they just wrap it up like that, because they were like, oh, this thing's just been lingering on for like a decade. We got to do something about it because
it comes back in a bullet from space.
Yeah. It's just it's things like that. So the idea of Wide Awake, it was very much a Claremont thing. I don't know how long he would have kept it going on for, because like I said, it was just kind of like this thing that lingered in the background in a lot of anti-mutant propaganda and sentiment that was either orchestrated by the federal government or was or any like laws or anything that were handled by the federal government. It was all Wide Awake stuff. And I guess maybe at some point he would have written a story where like the nature of Wide Awake would have like hit the press, right? Like it would have just blown the top of it all, the top off the whole thing. And everybody would have learned about it, and like that would have been it, and the government would have been like, okay, we have to like shut this down because public sentiment's turned against us. But I mean, would it? Because public sentiment hated the mutant population, and things like the Mutant Registration Act, the way that Claremont wrote it, were like publicly known. So even if the general public didn't know how far reaching Wide Awake went, they were on some level aware of its existence, but like nobody was really against it. But again, those are questions that we'll never have the answers to, right? Because Claremont bailed, within the first, I think, what is it, after like the Muir Island saga with X-Men, and then went
too
to
much
DC.
competition between him and Jim Lee, from what I understand.
Oh, do you not know about that? That whole story? Okay, so do you not know about that? Like Bob Harris and all that stuff that went on behind the scenes?
Do tell.
This is conjecture and rumor, right? So don't take this as an absolute truth. But supposedly the way it worked, when Bob Harris became editor of the X-Men or the X-Men universe, at that point you had Louise Simonson and I think Walter Simonson who were still working on X Factor.
Right.
No, I'm sorry. By that point in time, you had Louise Simonson who was writing it. Rob Liefeld was drawing it. They were doing New Mutants.
They were doing X-Force. Rob Liefeld.
Well, it was New Mutants, and then it became X-Force.
New Mutants, then X-Force.
Yeah, then it became X-Force. But Liefeld came on back when it was New Mutants. And actually, by that point in time, X Factor, that had been relaunched. X Factor had been axed. That team had been rolled over, and then you had X-Men Volume 2, which was the gold team, X-Men Volume or Uncanny X-Men, which was the blue team. So those teams were basically combined into one. With just that iconic cover that stretches like 4 pages from Jim Lee. Yeah, it's just one giant cohesive image. But the long and short of this is that Bob Harris argued that art is what sold comic books, not writing. And I would say, honestly, the balance is somewhere in between, right? I've seen comics that are drawn by Alex Ross, and I just don't read them because I don't like the writing. I always tell people World's Greatest Superheroes is kind of the perfect balance between art and writing, right? Like, Paul Dini writing it, Alex Ross drawing it. Like, it's just the perfect combo.
Right.
But, so Bob Harris, what would happen here is Rob Liefeld, like you'd have Louise Simonson who would do like scripts and stuff, and Liefeld would just be like, this should be different, and like he would change it, right? Or he would like draw it differently or something like that. With Jim Lee and Chris Claremont, I don't know how far reaching their disagreements were, but I think in terms of just like, I can't stand working with this guy. I think the most popular example of that is the relationship between Louise Simonson and Rob Liefeld. And it was a really interesting situation. I do know that when it came down to Claremont and Lee, the biggest issue you had there is Chris Claremont had been like writing these characters for 17 years. Jim Lee grew up reading these characters. So he wanted to draw Magneto. He wanted to draw Colossus and like all these different characters. And Claremont was like, I'm tired of writing them. Like, I want to kill them off and create some new characters. But because Bob Harris prized art above writing, anytime artists came to him and said, I don't like what the writer's doing, instead of saying, well, then the two of you guys need to come together and find some way to handle this, he would just say, what the artists want to do is what we're going to do. And it was really, really ironic because this ran off Claremont and it ran off, Louise Simonson. Like they ultimately bailed and, either went to go work for other companies or quit the industry entirely, with some of the other writers. But the funny thing was Jim Lee and all these guys, Mark Silvestri and so on, they looked at how guys like Steve Gerber were handled, right? Steve Gerber created Howard the Duck, and then Marvel was like, we have ownership of it. He's like, no, you don't. And he filed a lawsuit and all that kind of stuff. And they looked at the history of how Marvel treated the creations of different artists. And they were like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to just like elevate our profile. Because by this point, Rob Liefeld's in his early 20s making millions, right? I mean, making more money than, you and I will ever see in our lives, he's Rob Liefeld is arguably the hottest the hottest comic book artist like at that point in time, right? I would say it was a toss up between him and Jim Lee, right? Yeah. Just the two guys. They were the 1-2 punch of comic book artists back then. And so they're just like, all right, we have our profiles. People know who we are. Let's go make Image. And so in 1993, they just bailed, right? They were out. And so now you had the situation where Bob Harris didn't really have anybody to write the comics, didn't really have anybody to draw the comics because he gave his artist too much clout. And so that's the rumor. That's the story, how the story goes. Again, I don't know how much of that is an absolute, but different. That's the issue, right? You go back and you talk to different writers and different artists that came up during that point in time, and you'll get different stories, right? Because everybody has their own variation of history, and their variation tends to shine them in the best possible light.
I've been looking at some of the chat, and a comment that keeps popping up is, Rob, you should be doing comics, or you should be working for Marvel. Your knowledge is better than the editors at Marvel. One of the things we talk about in this space all the time is maybe it's just me. I might be projecting a bit because I don't want to talk on behalf of all the Black comic lords because they hate when I do that. But I got beef with editors at Marvel because I think. Okay. The problems I have with a lot of the storylines that are chosen, the directions they make in current comics, I think they're a bit lackluster and lack sometimes imagination. and that's not a general thing. I mean, some editors more so than others. But then I come across a guy like you who's got all this knowledge and has so much passion for these characters. And I
do not
wonder the
wanna
same
write
thing.
or
I
edit
wonder the
comics.
same thing that people in the chat are wondering. Why aren't you an editor at Marvel?
I have no desire to write or
No
edit
desire.
comics. I have no desire to do that. I mean, I have ideas, right? Like there was this idea that I had because, like, take for example, Guy Gardner, right? I was talking to a buddy of mine, Victor Dandridge, he's an indie comic creator. If you ever get a chance, I'll connect you and Victor. Victor's really, really cool. But he's a Black creator. But Victor has a very, very deep knowledge of comics as well. And so I ran this idea by him. I was like, I don't really have the whole idea fleshed out. And I was like, but I have this idea for a story where it's called Green Lantern to the Last Man. And it's like all the Green Lanterns are being killed off, right? Like, surprise, surprise, the whole of Sinestro Corps War is killing Green Lanterns everywhere they can find them, right? So, like, that's been done to death. But you have this really amazing moment between Guy Gardner and Hal Jordan, where Guy Gardner does not act like Guy Gardner, right? Because like Guy Gardner, he's just like this guy's like just hyper masculine, right? Like if a cop, like if like a Philadelphia cop became a Green Lantern, he would be Guy Gardner. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing, where he's just like rough him up, crack some skulls and, shoot first, ask questions later, that's like that super macho type guy. But what he would never do is actually have a heart-to-heart with Hal Jordan. And so what happens is there's this point where Hal Jordan is, where him and Hal Jordan are about to like face off against whatever this enemy is. And they know they're going to die, right? Like they know they're going to die. And at some point leading up to that Hal Jordan's ring had been destroyed. And so Guy Gardner had made a duplicate of his own ring and given it to Hal. And so Hal's been basically using a copy of Guy Gardner's ring this entire time. And so Guy Gardner just kind of like, he just sort of lets the walls down momentarily. And like he tells Hal Jordan, like, something that I never told you, but I've always believed, like, you are the best of us. Like you are the best of all of us as the Lanterns. And I've
Which
always
we all
looked
know.
up to you. Yeah, we all know. We all know. Yeah. But he's like, I've always looked up to you, and I've always seen you as something to strive towards, right? Something to strive for, that kind of thing. Just sort of letting all this stuff out, all these things he's always thought. And Hal Jordan doesn't quite know what to make of it. But before he can respond, Guy Gardner says, ring, directives such and such, and runs off some numbers. And it immediately puts a shield around Hal Jordan, and it takes away Hal Jordan's ability to use his own ring. And then it sends him to safety. And because Guy Gardner's like, you're not going to die here today. Like you have to live, because if you live, then we have a fighting chance. If you die, it's over for everybody. And so like the whole time, like Hal Jordan's like beating on the thing. He's like, no, Guy, right? You can't do that. And like, he's ultimately whisked away. And then Guy Gardner gets this amazing moment where like, he just like runs off the lantern oath, right? Brightest day and blackest night. Like the whole time he's doing it, you're like, this guy's going to die, right? Like he is absolutely going to die. And so he's just like, all right, big boy, let's dance. And then like races against this guy, like races up to this dude. And then you never find out what happens to it. It ends. And like, you never find out, or you never actually see Guy Gardner die. It would probably be something akin to like when Hyperion and Thor died against the Beyonders. And it's just kind of like this just really super dramatic thing, in the bleak cold nothingness of space, that kind of thing. But basically like Guy Gardner would die, and like the guy would go out like a hero. And then the other idea that I had was this Batman story, where Batman, for whatever reason, like, and not even because of mind control or anything like that, like, just like he just goes off the deep end or whatever it is, like wages a war, and he's just like, I'm ending all crime in the world, right? Kind of like a Superman from Injustice. Well, I don't know how I would work it or how it would be done or anything like that, but basically he goes on like this warpath. And there's a point near the end of the comic. Well, I should say before that, he's killed a multitude of superheroes, right? Superman,
Batman?
Wonder Woman, yeah, like Batman, because they stood in his way, right? But like he knows how to do it. We know that from like Tower of Babel, right? The Batman protocols and how to overpower different superheroes and whatnot. Yeah. So he ends up killing like Superman, Wonder Woman, right? Maybe some of the Green Lantern, Shazam, Cyborg. List goes on and on and on and on. And so there's a point where he's talking to Alfred, and Alfred's like, when is this going to stop, Master Bruce? Like this has to end. And Bruce Wayne's like, it's never going to end. Like, it's not going to be done until I've eliminated everybody. And so Alfred, you just get like this just like artistic rendering of Alfred's face. And that's when you realize Alfred comes to the realization that Batman just has to be put down. Right? The only way to make it stop is to kill Batman. And so while Batman's sitting there doing his thing, whatever it is, this like speech bubble comes from like off panel, which is obviously Alfred. And it's almost like a whimper, and it just says Shazam. And then like Alfred becomes Shazam, because what had happened is somewhere along the line, after Batman had killed Shazam, Alfred was brought by the Wizard Shazam to become his replacement, because Alfred's honorable, right? And he would do the right thing if it came.
Dude, that's crazy.
Yeah. So Alfred as Shazam has to kill Batman, and like he beats him, like he literally kills him. And it's like the whole time it happens, it's like the most crushing thing, right? Because like basically Alfred has to kill a son, because his son's just beyond hope. There's no saving him. There's no way to stop him, or there's no way to get him to stop. And so like it just ends with like Batman having to kill, like, and Alfred kills Bruce, and and it just kind of goes forward from there. But yeah, like I mean, it's stories like that. And I know they sound like overly dramatic, like all my stories that I'm coming up with are just like sadness and death, and it's like right, like I'm just like some emo kid, right? I'm just sitting around all day smoking cigarettes, listening to The Cure, and it's just like so I'm misunderstood by the world, and like that's it.
And PJ says then Damien comes in, and that's a whole.
Yeah, and then Damien comes in. Yeah,
then Damien comes in, and picks up his father's cowl and is like raises it above his head.
Yeah, like I will become the new Batman.
I will become the new Batman, obviously.
Alfred's like, no, you're not. And then he kills Damien too, and he's just like, I have the power now. This maniacal laughter. No, but to me, stories like that are the best kinds of stories, right? Like very emotional stories. Because if you look at something like, did you ever read World's Greatest Superheroes from DC Comics?
Oh, from back in the 70s, that one?
No. World's Greatest Superheroes. That was the Paul Dini, Alex Ross series. That was created, I want to say it was in the 2000s because of the success of Kingdom Come. I want to say that's when they were made. But no, those are, when you talk about the idea of editors and how a lot of comic book stories are being handled now, a lot of that emotion is what you lose. Is what's just not there in this day and age. The perfect example of that is World's Greatest Superhero, Batman War on Crime, right? And also Superman. Like the Batman Superman stories, those are phenomenal. Shazam's really, really good, but that one's more just like overly emotional. Not really due to Shazam, but because of like what's actually happening with a kid in the story. But with Batman and Superman, the Batman story focuses on this kid whose parents are basically killed senselessly, the same way that like Bruce Wayne's parents are killed. And Batman ends up with this kid's like captured or something. Like Batman catches this kid because this kid ends up committing a robbery or something. No, I'm sorry. His parents are killed in a robbery gone wrong is what it is. And Batman observes the whole thing, and he's like, this kid will be taken into the foster system or something like that, and hopefully he'll be able to find a better life. Batman kind of keeps track of him for a little while, but then like loses track because of everything else that he has going on in his life, and in the city. And so what ends up happening is he responds to a break-in at a warehouse. And when he gets there, he goes to like stop this kid who turns to pull a gun on him. And it's like the kid whose parents were killed. And that's where Batman's like, this is the direction that my life could have taken. Like I could have become this kid. Like I'm only where I am now because of all the money that my family had. But what if they were poor? Or what if they were poor? Like what if they were broke? What if I didn't have the resources that I have? And so there's this really, really touching moment where Batman like holds this kid and he says like, guns are what took our parents. Do not let a gun be the thing that takes you. And so like Batman takes the gun away from the kid, and then like I don't know if he really like takes him under his wing, but like he makes sure the kid is taken care of. And then Superman Peace on Earth is this story where Superman is like taking the tree to Rockefeller Center in New York, and it starts off really, really well. And then he comes across the whimper of this girl who's like malnourished, right, starving. And so like he takes her, I think, to like a soup kitchen or something like that to get her some food. And so he kind of looks around. He's like, there's so many people in the world who are suffering. And so he comes up with this idea to like deliver all this food and resources to people who just don't have it in different parts of the world. And along the journey, he comes across like dictators who have like these fake, these nickel slick smiles, and who are like, oh, of course we're going to give the food to our citizens and all that kind of stuff. And like Superman knows they're not going to, but he can't like kill the dictator or anything like that. And then like there's a point where the whole all the resources he has are shot down by somebody. You don't really get a name to it, but like they're shot down because Superman is because a lot of these governments kind of keep their citizenry under control by restricting how much food or resource they have, right? And Superman represents a threat to that. And so the whole idea behind the story is it's the fact that Superman can't save the world forcefully. He can't make people be better. Right, the best he can do is lead by example, and so it is a bit of it ends on a very somber tone, right? But it also ends on a very hopeful tone, because it's just like there's a point where like he's flying. There's a story where like he's outside the Earth, because you've seen it. You've seen even if you've never read it, you've seen a shot of Peace on Earth, because the shot that you've seen is the point where like Superman's just kind of like sitting back in his chair like that, and he looks like he's pondering, and like his shirt's partially unbuttoned, and you see the Superman logo under it. Right. And like it's drawn by that's from Peace on Earth. Right. Okay. And so it's just kind of like, I'm not going to give up on humanity. I can make them better. It's just, I've got to lead by example, that kind of thing. One of the bigger issues we have
did an entire comics explained episode without the pictures.
Yeah, basically.
All right. So we have this question from Shane the Watcher. What are you guys' thoughts on the new Trinity of Evil storyline? I'm tired of evil Batman.
The only Trinity of Evil I know about is the lead up to Forever Evil.
And if you're talking about the current Batman, Zara, I can never say that word.
Zara-Nar?
Yeah, the Zara-Nar or whatever. I don't know if that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the Batman story to finish before I go back and read it. So I'm not
alone. I'm not alone in that. Okay, good. I don't feel so bad.
Yeah. I used to read them like as they came out, but the issue is that because of how I cover stuff, like it can be very difficult to keep track of like everything that's happened. And 9 times out of 10, even when I was reading the stories as they came out, I'd have to go back and reread the previous issues anyway. So I was just kind of like, why not just read them? In the lead up to the release of like the 6th issue, right, or the 12th issue, or 18, or whatever the arc ends, and go forward from there.
Well, that actually leads to my next questions for you. So, comics when I was a kid and comics now, because I'm a lot older than you are different animals. The process is different. The product is different. The packaging is different. Now we have comics that are sort of geared towards doing these story arcs of 4 or 5 issues so that it can be packaged as a trade paperback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're writing for trade these days.
Right. They're writing for trade these days. And sometimes, back in the day, you'd have one-shot stories or stories that go 2 issues, and that was it. And you move on to the next one, or you change creative teams every several issues after a story arc is done, rather than simply canceling the book and then restarting it as a new volume. What are the things that and these are beefs that I have. What are the things that you like and you don't like about current comics?
So this is going to fly in the face of everything you just said. One of the things that I like about current comics is that they are written for the trade. Mm-hmm. Because it makes them very easily digestible, and it makes them very easily accessible. And I do like the fact that when a new creative team takes over a comic, that they may or may not continue on with what's already been done, right? So like a really good example is the end of Dan Slott's whole Spider-Man era, and then like Nick Spencer, right? Like back to basics. So like you go and you read Nick Spencer, his Spider-Man Volume 1, Back to Basics, like you read that story, and it doesn't really tie much into what Dan Slott did. It does to a degree because, it's just telling a, successive story involving Spider-Man. But you don't necessarily have to have read Dan Slott's run to understand it. And I think that's a good thing, right? I think having those entry points, right? So in effect, like having these comics done in such a way to where every new creative team is almost kind of a soft reboot of the character, I think is a good thing, right? I think it makes it easier for the average person to get into comic books. Don't get me wrong, I do kind of miss the old school method of storytelling, right? Where a writer would get onto a comic book and a writer would be on that comic for like 7, 8, 9 years. And they would tell just this gigantic cohesive story. But the issue that you run into with that is you run into the Claremont problem, right? You run into the Chris Claremont issue. Because like a really good example is my girlfriend Mariah. She read From the Ashes, right? The Chris Claremont, that story that dealt with like the Morlocks and Madeline Pryor and all that kind of good stuff. And she's like, I don't really know what's going on. And I was like, that's because you picked up in the middle of a Chris Claremont run. And so it was kind of like, okay, like, I mean, she understood enough, right, to be able to read the story and to enjoy the story because she understood the characters and so on. But like, she had a few questions here and there, and I was able to answer those for her. But for the average person, right, you say, unless you're talking about a story like Days of Future Past or something like that, right, just kind of a story that takes place in the future and is isolated from everything else that's going on now, right, you give that story to a person, the only questions they're going to have are like, who's Kitty Pryde? And like, who's Rachel Summers? And the answer is like, okay, so Rachel is the daughter of Jean Grey and Cyclops, but like this is her first story. She never appears before this, right? So you're good, right? And it's like, okay, cool. And then they kind of read the story, right? But you give them something like the Mutant Massacre, right, where like you get Power Pack and stuff like that. And it's just kind of like they kind of get dropped in the middle of it all. So I like the idea that stories are written for the trade in this day and age. What I don't like is more often than not with stories, there are not really any stakes. Or they follow the Claremont formula the wrong way. So here's the beauty of the Claremont formula, right? Because I feel like this is kind of the gold standard on how to write a comic book line in a way to where each of the characters feel interesting and unique, and they all have story arcs, but the story arcs are wrapped up relatively fast, right? Cyclops' evolution over the Claremont era is one of the easiest things to follow. Mm-hmm. Right, that Cyclops is part of the X-Men team under Chris Claremont, and then you follow his story arc through the Phoenix and the Dark Phoenix sagas. At the end of Dark Phoenix, Jean Grey dies. Cyclops meets Madeline Pryor. She's, wow, you look just like Jean. That's crazy, Isn't it weird?
And a little creepy.
Yeah. It's almost as if someone made you to look that way. But like at the time Madeline was introduced, she was supposed to be Cyclops riding off into the sunset. Right, it was Claremont getting rid of it. So it's just like, here's this redheaded girl who survived a plane crash, who bears a striking resemblance to Jean, and she thinks you're hot, and she wants to settle down in Anchorage, Alaska, pop out a kid, and then we'd never see Cyclops again. But Cyclops' arcs from one to the next in Chris Claremont's era, the introduction of Wolverine, the love triangle between Jean, Wolverine, and Cyclops, the death of Jean, at the end of the Dark Phoenix saga, the introduction of Madeline Pryor, the launch of X Factor, Cyclops abandoning Madeline and his son, and then taking off to X Factor to rejoin Jean. Everything that came after, X-Men Volume 2, Cyclops going into the 2000s with post House of M. It's all just one gigantic arc for the character of Cyclops. But you also have other arcs for individual characters, and you have events that are transpiring over the course of those arcs. And so if you pick up with, let's say, House of M decimation, right? Scarlet Witch takes away 98% of the mutant population's powers. Now it's up to Cyclops to basically figure out how to lead the X-Men because nobody can find Xavier. You can read that story in isolation and perfectly understand the character of Cyclops. No ifs, ands, or buts, no muss, no fuss. It's super easy to process, but there's stakes there. You can feel how much weight there is on the shoulder of Cyclops, right? You can see that like the entirety of the survival of the mutant population resides on Cyclops. The last 198 mutants remaining on the face of the planet, and a good chunk of them are all being kept on the Xavier grounds. And you feel that in the story. Now, granted, that also reflects the depth of the story, but then if you fast forward and you go into Schism, right, when the X-Men roster splits between Wolverine's team and Cyclops' team, right, then like you still feel that. You follow the story of Cyclops, you feel like you're seeing the world through the eyes of Cyclops. That just
he's often people deride him and say he's the Boy Scout of the team. And it's like, have you not read the last 30 years of comics involving Cyclops? He's anything but a Boy Scout. I mean,
he was the Boy Scout until he wasn't. Until he became the bad guy.
Until he became the bad guy. And then the face of the whole mutant resistance. And then, we got another super chat. I was referring to the follow-up to Beast World. The Trinity of Evil. I think that's the follow up to the Trinity of Evil question.
Oh, I never read Beast World. I didn't really have an interest. I'm not really interested in Beast. I'm sorry, in Beast Boy. Like he's not really interesting to me. So I never really read Beast World. I mean, if it really is good, I guess I can take a look at it. But yeah, no. As far as my current run on Batman, as far as I'm aware, the current Batman comics have deviated away from Batman to cover Joker Year One, and then that's going to go back to Batman after Joker Year One is over. But yeah, no. So
do we have a question from Bo Big about my favorite superhero, Black Panther. You may not know this, Rob. I absolutely detested the last run on Black Panther.
Are you talking about Ta-Nehisi Coates?
No.
Or
the guy after her. I don't say his name. That guy.
Hold on. Who wrote? Okay. I haven't followed Black Panther since I'm ashamed to say this. I have not followed the Black Panther comics since the first story arc of Ta-Nehisi Coates. Mm-hmm. I tried to get into the Intergalactic Empire of Wakanda. I had a hard time following. I just didn't really do anything for me. But I have not consistently followed Black Panther since Reginald Hudlin's run and Avengers and New Avengers.
Oh, good. So we don't have to talk about the run before that. All right.
Okay. So who wrote the Black Panther run before Al Ewing's current run?
John Ridley.
Okay.
And it was a run that let's just say it was highly critical. There's a lot of criticism.
What made it okay? What created all the criticism?
Oh my God, Rob!
Spill the tea, man. Like I'm curious. Like I gotta know.
You're making me talk about things that are just like a 2-hour conversation. Well, you said the last run that you read in Black Panther was in the beginning of the Ta-Nehisi Coates run. One of the things that people criticized that run for was the deconstruction of the character of T'Challa. First, in the first arc, Nation Under Our Feet, was the deconstruction of Wakanda itself. You know, going from
I thought that was Ta-Nehisi Coates' run, A Nation Under Our Feet.
Isn't that what I said?
I thought you said it was Ridley's run. Okay, yeah.
No. So I'm getting to that. So the Ta-Nehisi Coates run, A Nation Under Our Feet, was a deconstruction of Wakanda itself, moving from a monarchy to a parliamentary type of government, and the changes and ebbs and flows of that, and T'Challa feeling lost in the fact that he is no longer this all-powerful monarch king anymore. He's part of a larger parliament. A lot of people hated that. Along with some other factors, originators making the Wakandans out to be, in essence, colonizers themselves. And then you move from that storyline into the intergalactic realm of Wakanda, Empire of Wakanda, where he is, in essence, a slave and is deconstructed again because he doesn't know who he is. And you see him build up from being a slave at the beginning of the arc to at the end of the arc, spoiler alert, he is now emperor of an intergalactic empire. And
so is it self-contained?
Yeah, it's all in that intergalactic Empire of Wakanda.
Okay. I didn't know if it tied into everything else. So
I'm bringing it up to the next run by He Who Shall Not Be Named, who I've said twice already, and I feel some way about that. So he's already had these two deconstructions, both of Wakanda and of himself, and you've had him rebuilt his relationship organically and really well done by Coates with Storm, where they reach a point where they're like, look, we didn't work out as a married couple, but I love you and I love you and I respect that you want to be an X-Man and I respect that you want to be king of Wakanda and that's your priorities too. Well, we can love each other and respect each other and respect our roles and respect our goals. And we don't have to name it as a marriage or anything like that. We can just be two people who love each other and respect our roles and our positions, and we support each other and go forward from there.
That's what adults do. That's kind of weird because in Avengers versus X-Men, Black Panther was like the high priest of Wakanda has nullified our marriage. He
nullified the marriage, but
she's like, aren't you the high priest of Wakanda? And he's like, that doesn't matter. And it's just like,
so Coates goes into that. He's like, yeah, I was being kind of a jerk. I get that. I was being emotional. Wakanda got wiped out. I saw it got wiped out. The guy who wiped it out was the guy wearing an X on him. and you people wear X's, and I overreacted. I overreacted. My bad. And they talked through it. It wasn't like a one issue thing. Like in that whole run, they were talking, and that's what I mean by it was kind of organic, and they worked through their issues. And at the end, they were cool. They had reached a good place. And then, so the next run was a deconstruction of Wakanda again, so much so that they completely turned against T'Challa, and were disrespectful to him. And I kid you not, every other issue, if not at some point, every issue, T'Challa was getting his ass kicked by somebody.
Really?
And his character was just getting dragged. Wakandans were literally cursing him out, saying, you know, F you, T'Challa. It was just, the dialogue wasn't good. The characterization of the character, T'Challa, wasn't good. And you know, the writer's a good writer. He's done a lot of good things. His current run on Ministry of Compliance, I hear, is really good. His work on GCPD was good. His work on I Am Batman was good. American, this escapes me, whatever the book he did, the independent book. Those were all good runs. But this was not his best work, clearly. It was very divisive.
I won't lie, like that does not sound that different than like Doom War, where Black Panther and Storm are like ran out of their own country by like the Wakanda national.
And that's part of the criticism is this has already been done. Like this guy just got made an emperor, and we want to explore from there and see the ramifications of that. Have him go out and have Wakanda get invaded by some alien race, and they've got to fight them off, or do something, make the story grow from there, not rehash what's been done time and time and time again with the deconstruction of the character. He's already been deconstructed for like the last 10 years. People didn't want to see more of that. They wanted to see him move forward.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't Black Panther. See, here's the thing. Black Panther is he's an interesting character. I always felt like Black Panther was more interesting when he was part of a group. So like Hickman's Avengers, New Avengers, and Secret Wars is a Black Panther story, especially just Avengers and New Avengers, right? That is a 4 some odd year Black Panther story. That's really all it is. I mean, you get other people in there, but it's mostly a Black Panther story, at least until you get to the only exceptions to that are Infinity and Time Runs Out.
Yes.
And then by that point, those are more of just like an ensemble story, because it's like everything's going sideways, y'all, and like the multiverse is ending and we don't know what to do, right? So like that's, you know, so
yeah, I consider those runs to be kind of semi Black Panther runs in and of themselves. It's kind of like Black Panther and the Avengers runs by Jonathan Hickman. I kind of love those runs.
Yeah, I mean, it's like some of the most iconic Black Panther moments in recent memory came out of Hickman's run, right? You know, like when he's getting ready to detonate the antimatter bomb, and they're like, "What are you waiting for?" And he's like,
right.
"I'm just remembering who I used to be," and then just bam, presses the trigger and blows up the world. You know, the one where there's the moment where he finally gets his revenge on Namor in the aftermath of Infinity, and like Shuri was like, "Put the dagger where it belongs," and like
where it belongs.
He teleports down to the broken world, stabs. You know, no, what is it? Is it? No, he's not on the world. It's when they're on the platform.
The platform
that stabs Namor in the chest.
World.
Yeah, like Black Bolt. You know, one of the like 4 times he's useful in the comics. Like he blows, you know, sends Namor flying off the platform, and I mean, it's just
what is the deal with you and Black Bolt? Because I keep seeing people put in the chat things about Black Bolt. Do you have issues with Black Bolt?
Yeah, man, he sucks. Yeah, Black Bolt sucks. Yeah, but no. Like it's, I mean, like there's whenever I think of Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run, there's iconic moments, right? Cool moments where Iron Man's like, you know, who thinks that way, Reed? You know, people who have never flown. You know, when they're talking about Icarus, and of course, Avengers 44, the super awesome fight between like Captain America and Iron Man, where they finally settle the beef they've had ever since Civil War. You know, and like you get these really, really cool moments. But more often than not, the moments that I think of are like Black Panther reforming the Illuminati, and like when he's praying to the Panther goddess Bast, and he's like, "Save me from what we are about to do." And like when Captain America ends up destroying the Infinity Gauntlet, and Black Panther has to be like the voice of reason between them. And when like the undercurrent to all of that is the fact that like Namor the Submariner destroying Wakanda during Avengers versus X-Men is still like an unresolved plot thread. And the Black Panther's like, we have to meet in Necropolis. And the Illuminati are like, why? Why don't we just meet in Wakanda? It's like, because if they find out that I'm hanging out with Namor, they're going to kill him and me. Right. So no, like we're it's like they're going to kill you and me. Like that's not going to happen.
Everything you just said is proof positive of why having good writing in comics can be such an incredible thing. It doesn't matter what the character is. A good writer can just do incredible things.
It is, but like here's the thing though. It also kind of requires taking a step back, right? You know, like for example, there are people who love the She-Hulk comic book series. I've never loved She-Hulk. I've never thought she was interesting. Even when people go back and they talk about how amazing the John Byrne run was back in the day, it's like, I mean, I guess, you know, but like I've never really been a fan of the She-Hulk character. There are people who love it, right? There are people who were legitimately upset when the She-Hulk run ended. I loved Al Ewing's Ultimates run. There are people who thought it was boring and they didn't like that he was reworking the whole mythos. I love Defenders Beyond. Run. It was a phenomenal run, right? I love Defenders and Defenders Beyond. There are people who hated it, right? So it's kind of the beautiful thing about the comic book industry, and it's kind of funny because in some ways it sort of mirrors what happens in like manga and anime. But one of the cool things about the comic book line at the moment is that there's something for everybody. The issue that you run into and the way in which it really differs from anime and manga is if you were making a one-to-one comparison from like comics to manga, it would be like if I don't know, like Jonathan Hickman sat down and was like, I am writing the Avengers. And then once I'm done writing the Avengers, there are no more Avengers. And that's it, right? Then like that's the manga equivalent, right? Like somebody comes up with an idea, they tell a story in manga form, and when the story's done, it's done forever. And it's nothing's ever being done with it again, right? Because the creator's like, I'm finished, and that's it. It has a beginning.
There's no licensing, there's no franchising, there's no
nothing. Unless it gets turned into an anime, right? Or it gets turned into like some kind of anime film, right? You know, a Japanese cartoon. Then you just you like that's the end of it, right? It's over. But like that doesn't happen. Jonathan Hickman writes his Avengers, and then it goes into Secret Wars, and then you get like another Avengers run that comes after. Which I don't remember who wrote Avengers. Was it Mark Waid who wrote Avengers? Yeah, because he had the Kang saga and all different Avengers. But yeah, like somebody else takes over and they tell their story on the Avengers, and then their run is done, and somebody else tells their story. You know, and so it just kind of goes on and on and on and on and on. But I think one of the coolest things about comic books is that Avengers 4 years ago may not have been for a particular reader, but they love the Avengers now. Right. Like I love Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four. I did not really love any of the Fantastic Four runs that came after, which included Dan Slott. But then I like Ryan North's run. Right. So like I can just sort of take what I like, right? I can just kind of pick and choose what it is that I enjoy.
And that goes back to what you were saying about how trades are really helpful for this style of production, because you can focus on, well, I like this trade with this writer and this creative team, and then I like this one, but I don't necessarily like this one.
Yeah, and that's why I say it varies. Like for example, like one of your fans was talking about Carol Danvers. Well, that's the thing. Like Carol Danvers post Civil War II, like a lot of people saw it as character assassination, and the reality is that between Kelly Sue DeConnick's run, right, Higher, Further, Faster, leading up to Civil War II, people loved Carol Danvers. They were like, all right, she's awesome, right? I mean, she becomes like the new Captain Marvel, and you get like these really, really amazing stories, right? I mean, I still say Kelly Sue DeConnick's run is the greatest Captain Marvel run that's ever been written for Carol Danvers. Before that, she was just the long-haired blonde, you know, with a huge bust, and she was there to just look pretty and to get boys to buy comic books. But when you go into Kelly Sue DeConnick's run, it's the first time where you actually see meaningful development for the character of Carol Danvers. But then you go into post-Civil War II, and a lot of folks were just like, so what's going on here, right? And Civil War II, it was, I mean, pardon my language here, right? It was a half-assed cash grab is really all it was. Poorly written, poorly handled, and a lot of people were just really upset at the fact that Carol Danvers was used as a way to kill what was arguably the hottest comic book character between comic book readers and non-comic book readers, right? That was coming out of Marvel. Because everybody knew who Iron Man was. Everybody loved Spider-Man, but Iron Man was the face of the MCU, and a lot of fans, you know, they really loved Iron Man in the comics. And especially coming out of runs like Matt Fraction's Five Nightmares, Kieran Gillen's Secret Origin of Tony Stark, and like that whole run. People loved Stark's character.
And he was a hot character at the time.
Yeah, but they saw it as like character assassination for Carol Danvers, and they kind of turned on her character and just never had a desire after that. And then, of course, people latched on, and grifters and all that kind of stuff, and people have been riding the hate train ever since. But yeah, like in a lot of ways, yeah, like Azure Beast makes a really good point, right? Civil War II killed the character of Carol Danvers, and it really did. In one story arc, Bendis managed to successfully kill off all the development and the goodwill that people had towards a character that for something like 40 years was either irrelevant or was only bought by guys who have weird tastes, right? And like that was it. Yeah,
you got a compliment from John Fortune. He said the best thing about Rob is he doesn't come up with fake facts. Another comic group wanted to say Storm and T'Challa was a retcon story.
Storm and T'Challa was a retcon. It was a retcon story. Yeah, like Storm and like when Black Panther was originally introduced. Well, it was, but it wasn't. In the early days of Black Panther, there was never any reference to him ever having had a romantic relationship with Storm. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until
or anyone else for that matter, really. I mean, you had Monica Lynn, you had his the girlfriend he had in college, and that's pretty much it. They didn't really talk.
Yeah, no, there was no. I mean, you know more. I mean, obviously, you know more about those early love interests about Black Panther than I do. Like, I didn't know about them. Monica Lynn.
The Marvel Team Up 100 was just their interlude, and then that kind of was like this one snapshot story that got expounded upon later on with Eric Jerome Dickey's Storm book, and then later on, Priest mentioned that team up, and said, "Yeah, we kind of had our moment there," and you saw the kindling of the fire between them. And Monica Lynn was still alive at the time, and then Hudlin took it even further, and that's where they got married. To say it's a retcon, I don't know. Well, I guess, but there's a basis for it in that you do know that they met when they were children. That happened back in when did that issue come out? 1980 or something like that.
I don't know that there was a. I don't know that they ever met when they were kids.
Yeah, it was in Marvel Team Up 100.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
mean, so if it was a retcon, it was a contextual retcon, because it's not as though. I mean, I'd have to check out Marvel Team Up 100, but I'm assuming that in that story that they never actually said that the two of them never had a romantic relationship. The two of them were never romantically involved when they were younger. And then this comic comes along and says, well, actually they were. Because I do know that's pretty much how it kind of happened. But I mean, is it how it happened or kind of how it happened?
Well,
I'm asking because I don't know.
The story was that they met. Black Panther was on walkabout. He is a teenager trying as a young king. You're supposed to train and what have you and go on walkabout. He goes on walkabout. Storm had I guess left Cairo at that point and was sort of going towards moving to Kenya, which is where her mother was originally from, and I guess she's on her own sort of travel, and they run across these racist guys who are trying to bother some people. Storm and T'Challa both intervene, and ultimately that you could see that they were attracted to each other, and then the story ends. And what happened subsequent, there was a run on Storm. I think it was like the second or third Storm title that was done by Eric Jerome Dickey, and it really expounded upon that encounter and said there was something more to it. They actually he said that he basically expounded upon the story and make it a much larger storyline, and they actually had a romance during that time, and ultimately decided to split ways because T'Challa's like, I got to go back to my duties as being a king in training and go on walkabout, and she's like, I need to go back to Kenya. And then in the Priest run,
wait, are you talking about the newer origin, or are you talking about the old Marvel Team Up 100?
Hold on, let me share it. Hold on.
Because I know the newer story established that like they met and they were in love and all that kind of stuff when they were younger, and that Black Panther, he couldn't be with Storm because his duties were.
This is the Marvel Team Up 100 I'm talking about. It's also the first appearance of Karma from the New Mutants.
Yeah.
And that came out in, what's the date on this? September 23rd, 1980.
Okay.
So that's quite a while ago. That's why I don't really consider it a retcon. It was more of a further expounding on a storyline that had already taken place.
That's fair.
They expounded upon it in a couple of different series. The Storm Run, Priest expounded upon it when she shows up in that run, and she references, yes, it's been a while since I've seen you since we were children, or younger, I should say. They were like teenagers. And then Hudlin expounds upon that even further, and they go on to full-on courtship and eventually marriage. So that's why I kind of push back on it's a retcon. It really wasn't. It's actually canon, if anything else.
I mean, okay. I mean, I guess, like, I know that, like, when they were younger, that, like, they were actually involved in a romantic relationship. I would say that if a Marvel team up number 100, all it makes reference to is the fact that they just knew each other.
That's true. That's fair.
And then in the actual flashback origin, it's like, well, no, I mean, they didn't just know each other; they were actually dating. I mean, I guess you could call it a retcon. I mean, retcons are normally just like changing an established canon. So it'd be more accurate to say it was a retcon if you said, like, they never met when they were kids.
Yeah, a retcon is where you change something. This was more of a expounding on what wasn't told.
It depends on how you define it. It depends on how you define it. So, like, here's a really good example. People talk about the idea of retcon. So, like, in Deadpool's Secret Wars, Spider-Man got the Venom symbiote because Deadpool told him, hey, I think there's, like, when he was like, hey, do you know where I can get a new costume? Deadpool was like, yeah, it's over there. Right now, like, Marvel Secret Wars number 9 or number 6, whatever it was, that Peter gets the Venom symbiote, like, that never happens. So you could say it's a retcon, but, like, I mean, there's, like, literally the appearance of Deadpool and his involvement there. There's, but nonetheless, like, you could call it a retcon. You could say it's not a retcon. I mean, I don't know. Like, to me, the definition of retcon seems really, really loose, and it seems to be more like more predicated on alterations or adjustments to existing continuity, as opposed to outright just changing continuity. So I don't know. It kind of depends.
Jeffrey Thorne says it's a retcon if after this meeting in the pastel they are shown meeting and there's no reference made to them already knowing each other. Well, there was a reference made to them knowing each other. I think in the Priest one is when she shows up and says and references, hey, it's been a while since we've seen each other, which was be the Marvel Team Up 100. And then I don't get this statement. Rob throws bra. You must have some serious fans. F knives. I don't know what that is. But let's go to Jamal Days. Thank you for the super chat. Who's more OP and Doomsday, Blue Marvel or Null?
I'm reading this comic online to see where she makes that comment. I don't know, because it is an interesting piece of history. Like, it is an interesting piece of history, the whole Storm and Black Panther thing. Okay, so who's more OP, Doomsday, Blue Marvel, or Null? I guess Null. Just the level of power, the fact that he was able to kill Celestials using All Black. I guess I would say Null. I don't know. See, it's weird. It's weird because there's so many inconsistencies. Like in Al Ewing's Mighty Avengers run, the one with the Luke Cage team, where Doctor Strange is during Infinity, and the Ebony Maw makes Doctor Strange summon Shumagorath. And so, like, Shumagorath shows up on Earth, and, like, Blue Marvel flies through his head and destroys him. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's like, okay, well, was it Shumagorath, or was it like a facsimile of Shumagorath? Like, what was actually going on?
Well, even more recently in Defenders, where Blue Marvel just knocks out the Beyonder. Like,
yeah, he defeats the Beyonder. Yeah. So it's like, okay, I don't. He's like, well, you guys are made of matter, and I'm powered by antimatter. So boom, right? And it's just like, okay, I mean, I guess. Like, it's very fast and loose. So there's too many inconsistencies. That's one of the things. It's why I don't really worry too much about power scaling and, like, who could defeat who. Because like Incredible Hulk, for example, couldn't breathe underwater until you got to Jason Aaron's run, and then he could because he needed to, because the story demanded it. So yeah, I don't know.
The answer to all Versus Comics questions are it depends on who's writing the book.
Yeah, it really does. Which I know fans hate because like they're like, no, you have to pick one. Like somebody has to be the most powerful out of these three, right? Like there has to be an answer here. Like people are never satisfied with non-answers, you know. Like it's but I mean it's comics, man. Like it is. Like I mean, people say like how powerful is Superman? Okay, well, what Superman are we talking about? Are we talking about like Silver Age Superman where he would just get powers? You know, it's like, well, I mean, because of my super glasses, that you know, and it's like, I mean, is that what we're talking about? Right? He would just get powers of convenience. So by the time the Silver Age comes to an end, he can do everything. Like, what was it? That one story from the 70s, right before the Bronze Age ended, where he outran Infinity and was stopped by the Spectre. Yeah, by the Spectre because what was it? It was a old. Oh my God! It wasn't even a main. It was like DC Presents or something like that, an old DC Presents comic. But like it's him and Supergirl who were coming off of War World for something, and like either she's hit or knocked unconscious. She goes flying. Superman's trying to find her. He flies so fast that he like outruns time and space, and he almost approaches the realm of the presence. And like the Spectre stops him. And like it's that like it's literally the infinity symbol that looks like eternity, like it's that like it's that kind of stuff. Like what kind of Superman, like which Superman are we talking about, guys? Are we talking about like the post Julius Schwartz Superman whose powers were nerfed by 50% and he was immune, like kryptonite had no effect on him? Like you know, which Superman are we talking about? So I don't know, it's weird. I try not to worry about it too much.
The chat's going crazy over this. So I mean, Richard's talking about Null did cut Sentry in half. Cuckoo says it was Schuma's avatar, not a fully powered Schuma, so he kind of agrees with your theory on that.
That I would agree. I mean, like it's one of the things that's been established is like if Shuma Gorath in his full might were to invade the Marvel universe, he would kill everybody, right? Like there'd be no stopping him. In fact, we saw in the Cancerverse what happens when the many-angled ones completely invade a universe and take it over. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, and like okay, so for example, like here's something else. Eddie Brock with the Enigma Force was able to defeat Null the Symbiote God. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. The problem with the Enigma Force is it's so inconsistently depicted. Spider-Man had the Enigma Force. The best he could do was punch the Incredible Hulk into the atmosphere. So I mean, like it's just yeah, it's there's things are so inconsistent in terms of
Peter Parker always holds back when he punches.
I mean, I guess, but he can probably let loose a little bit with the Hulk because I know you're talking about the fight between Superior Spider-Man and the Scorpion.
Yeah,
when he punches his jaw off his face and he's like, "Holy cow!" Like Peter could have beat us to death at any point in time. Like, yeah, I get what you're talking about. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
I was giving.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't really worry about power scaling too much.
Well, we're the Black Comic Lords, and one of the things that we're always talking about is having better representation and diversity in comics. And you've done some great videos featuring a lot of Black heroes. Who's a Black comic superhero that you would love to see get more love in comics? Get more exposure, I should say.
Monica Rambeau.
Why is that?
Because she is arguably one of the most powerful characters to ever exist. There was this really, really cool moment in Al Ewing's
say that part one more time for the people in the back.
There's this really, really cool moment in Al Ewing's Ultimates, and I don't remember the exact context. Like she's injured, or maybe it's just it's Adam Brashear like studying her. But he's just like, you do realize you're made of pure energy. Like you don't have a physical form anymore. He was like, the way people see you is that's just the form you take on. She's like, you're not, he's like, you're not that dissimilar from Galactus, right? Like Galactus appeared, like the way Galactus looks is simply just because of the fact that he's a mirror for whatever looks at him. He's like, but like Adam Brashear is like, you take this form because it's what you're most comfortable with, but you don't actually have a physical form. You are pure energy, and you can manipulate every form of energy. And being able to manipulate all form of energy means being able to manipulate the atomic and molecular structure of matter. So this girl is just like Monica Rambeau is one 6-issue story arc away from being the most powerful being in all of existence in Marvel Comics, and it would be believable, right? It's not one of these things where it's like, well, Iceman's Omega level because he can freeze the Earth and speed up, slow down molecules, and he could like alter reality. I mean, no. I mean, you'd have to fudge the numbers pretty hardcore.
Didn't they have at one point where Iceman could like transport people where he froze? They did some storyline like that where he was actually able to transport people, freezing molecules. I don't remember. They went really OP on Iceman. But to your point, even Black Panther pointed out to Monica in the Hudlin run, where he's like, the way you use your powers, Monica, makes me sad. And she's like, why is that? He's like, you use your powers like a 6-shooter.
Yeah.
You're a goddess. Act like it,
Yeah. She's just made of like complete, she's complete and total pure energy.
She's pure energy.
So yeah, like, I mean, she would absolutely, one of the 4 fundamental forces that, I mean, she'd be an absolute hoss. I mean, is she somebody who could like defeat Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet? I mean, I don't know, but she'd stand a better chance than most anybody else. So yeah, I mean, her ability to control matter, I mean, it was just, like I said, give a writer, give like Reginald Hudlin a Monica Rambeau book and say, your job, Reginald Hudlin, is to make this girl like God. He'll do it in 6 issues and it'll be believable, right?
Yeah.
And it'll be built on what happened in Al Ewing's Ultimate. So I would say Monica Rambeau, she definitely deserves a lot more screen real estate, or a lot more page real estate. I mean, I know they did like the miniseries Photon and all that kind of stuff, but no, I mean, like an Al Ewing Monica Rambeau book where it's like, so let's take the brakes off and just see what this chick can really do in like 6 issues. Like I think that would be dope. So yeah, my vote's for Monica Rambeau.
I have a tough question for you. All right. This is a tough, because we struggle with this question all the time. So if you don't have an answer, don't feel bad, because we don't know the answer either. A lot of really great Black characters in comics, their runs don't do well. They just don't sell. And some do. But for the most part, a lot of them don't. What do you think? If you decide, you know what, I've changed my mind, I'm going to be editor-in-chief at Marvel, what would you establish as the paradigm to help more Black characters be successful in their runs at Marvel? What do you think those stories, or what have you, what would it take? What do you think?
I don't know, man. This is why I don't want to be an editor, because like I don't want to make decisions like this. I just want to be the guy who
I told you it was a tough question.
Yeah, I just want to be the guy who reads comics. It kind of depends. I think at some degrees it's because of the nature of the characters. So outside of Adam, the Legend of Blue Marvel, name a significant series of events that Adam Brashear was involved in that, had he not been involved, would have turned the tide.
That's called having agency. But yeah,
like there aren't any. There are none, right? Like, I mean, I guess sure, the whole Shumagorath thing, but that's like one page, like 1 or 2 pages. Even in like Avengers, the New Avengers, right? Like there's a point in I think it was Al Ewing's Mighty Avengers, where like he shows up and just kind of yells at Reed Richards for a little bit and then leaves. Like there's a reason why I didn't want to be a part of your team, that kind of thing. I think if they had made him part of the Illuminati, it would have been more interesting. I think it would have been more intriguing if Blue Marvel had been. I can see why they didn't, because Bendis had already established what the Illuminati was. And because of what Hickman was doing, it was better to just go with the established roster and then just kind of throw Captain America in there so he could have something to circle back around to during Original Sin, and then turn Captain America into like a kind of villain of the Illuminati and give him a purpose post Rick Remender's The Nail storyline where he lost his super soldier shield. So I could see Black Panther is popular simply because of like the legacy he has. Right, like Jungle Action, the solo series. Honestly, I think one of the reasons why Black Panther is as popular as he is because of Eric Killmonger, both in the comics and in the MCU. But also, I would say somebody like Sam Wilson I mean, the guy he was a sidekick for most of his time. I think that Rick Remender's Captain America run, when he became Captain America, was a fantastic story. I think that when you had Sam Wilson Captain America and you had Steve Rogers Captain America during Nick Spencer's run, which I still say Nick Spencer's run is the greatest Captain America run there ever was. I think that was fantastic. I think oftentimes Marvel has these ideas on what to do with like Black characters in the moment, but they don't really have any idea on what to do with them for like the long term.
Right.
An important distinction to
investment in the
understand.
character.
Yeah, the investment, because I think that one of the big issues is that Marvel's not necessarily willing to invest in characters long term. Like here's a good example. Something a lot of people don't know is the original X-Men was so unpopular, it was canceled. Like the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Arnold Drake, Gary Friedrich X-Men run. Like it was canceled.
It went into reprints for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, it just went into reprints for 30 issues. And then they brought it back. Well, it went from 63 to, or what is it? 64 to 93. And then 94, you get Uncanny X-Men and the Count Nefarious story with Chris Claremont. So the X-Men were originally canceled. Doctor Strange didn't last very long. The Incredible Hulk lasted 6 issues and then went into reprints and then eventually got his own solo series where he became Green. There's a lot of, outside of like Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, right? These kind of like characters that were landmark in some capacity. There's been a lot of comics that even in the early days were canceled and brought back. Right, for all the talk about how awesome Marvel was, like his character was kind of popular, but only because there wasn't really anybody else in space. Right, if Marvel was a story where he was an Earthbound superhero, he would have been canceled like that because he didn't bring anything unique or interesting to the table. Right, but there really was no Dan Abnett Cosmic Saga back then. The closest you had was some Jim Starlin stuff with Silver Surfer, Thanos, and a few other things. But I think that there wasn't really. Sam Wilson was absolutely a sidekick. He was absolutely a sidekick. He may not have been a teenager, but he was 100% a sidekick.
Oh
like,
God,
okay,
that's one of our Black comic lives.
Herschel Lewis. Yeah, like just because the comic said Captain America and the Falcon does not mean that the Falcon was not a sidekick. He 100% was a sidekick. Like, no,
I mean, there was a Batman and Robin series. It didn't make Robin not a sidekick.
Didn't make Robin the main star, right? It wasn't 2 co-stars, right? It was the star and then the sidekick, right? And that's Sam Wilson was 100% a sidekick. For years, he was a sidekick. But no, I think that there's just a lack of investment. There's a lack of investment because it's not like it was back then. Right, where it was like, okay, like we will. I got a panel to disprove. He literally says him and Cap are equal partners. Oh, I'm sure he does. Right,
I know exactly the panel he's talking about.
Me and Captain America are best friends, and like we're equal partners. Like, aren't you? Yeah. Like, isn't that right, Steve Rogers? I mean, that
doesn't make him not a sidekick. It's because he says, "I'm not a sidekick." Yeah. Oh yeah, Sam, you're my partner. You're
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's like me coming along and saying like I have proof that I'm a millionaire. It's like, really? Okay, well, what's your proof? I just told you I'm a millionaire. If you don't believe me, just ask me and I'll tell you. Like, it's like just because you declare a thing to be true does not mean that it's true.
The very fact that you have to have a panel that says, "Hey, I'm not a sidekick," probably indicates you're a sidekick.
Do it, Lewis, man. I love you to death. No, just because you have a comic book panel where the guy who's being called a sidekick says, "No, I'm not," does not mean that he's not a sidekick.
It kind of works.
It's like walking into a guy and just being like, "You're an idiot." And the guy says, "No, I'm not." It's like, "Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I guess I was wrong. You must clearly be intelligent." Like, it's
all right. So, Blair Tion, I think that's how you pronounce it. What comic do you collect?
You guys want to see the comics that I have up here? I've got 5 comics up here. Yeah, okay.
Turn the camera around. Let's see.
Actually, yeah, I can.
Or bring it down. Whatever you want to do.
Okay. So there is X-Men #1.
Wow.
Signed by Jim Lee, and then Giant Size X-Men, New Mutants. That's not the Marvel graphic novel. That's just the original #1.
Right.
And then X Factor, and then X-Men Volume 2, issue #1. And that's just one of the variants. Like I said, I have the other ones down there. Let's see. I've also got the first appearance of Eobard Thawne Autographed by Joshua Williamson, because his Flash run was phenomenal, right? I love, like, that was literally like, that was his blow up story, was his Flash run. It was amazing. I've got X-Force #1. I have what else? X Factor number 5, The Appearance of Apocalypse. Uncanny X-Men, I think it was 286, the first appearance of Bishop. Superior Iron Man #1, I have signed by Stan Lee, but yeah, I mean, I don't collect like on a large scale. I just grab ones that are particularly important to me, like particularly relevant.
Are there any books that you go to your LCS on Wednesday and have subscription to, and you definitely are currently reading like all the time, like without fail? Anyone that
anything related to X-Men, Jonathan Hickman's Gods. The funny thing is, I don't really do LCS. I do all my stuff digital, right? Yeah. Which, like, I tell people that, and they're like, "Boo hiss, boo hiss," and I'm like, "It's 2024. I'm not walking around with a stack of comics, right? Like, I'll just read them all on my iPad." Right? Like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do with this great big huge stack of comics that I read once and have no desire to keep after that? So like, yeah, like I read everything digitally now. It's really interesting when you get into the discussion about local comic book stores, because, like, to me, I've very much been the person who's just kind of been like, okay, in order for comic book stores to survive, they need to be more than just like comic book stores, right? Like down the road, for example, there is a comic book store that's slowly going out of business, because it's literally just a throwback to the 1990s, right? I mean, they still got posters from like the old, like, David Michelini Venom Lethal Protector from like back in the 90s, right? Like, I mean, they just have those super old school, but then they're faded, right? And all that kind of stuff. And you walk in there and it's just nothing but just some comic books on the shelves and long boxes in the back. And that's it. Right. And it's like, well, I mean, okay. But then, like, there's another comic book store around here where, like, you can get comics, but you can also buy manga, and they do like tabletop games and that kind of stuff. And so I certainly get that there's this idea out there that, like, we need to make sure we support our local comic book stores, and make sure that they can survive into the future. And it's like, okay, I get that. But, like, is that local comic book store running their business in a way to where they can guarantee their survival into the future? Or are they living in like 30 years ago and just refuse to move forward with the changing times? Because the unfortunate reality here, whether you love it or not, is that when you're running a business, it's your job to adjust to the environment. It's not the environment's job to adjust to you. So it's like, that's the way it is. I mean, it's like, adjust with the changing times, or,
our producer Derek wants to know if there's any indies that you read.
Any indies? I feel like the topic of like local comic book stores and all that is that a very sensitive topic on your channel?
No, I mean,
oh, okay. No, I was just curious. What indies do I read? Right now, I'm not reading any indies. Unless like Boom Studios counts as like an indie, like
of
Boom
course.
or one of those.
Of course.
I mean, they're not the big two, so I don't know. Like, I'm a little finicky when it comes to indies, because I consider indies anything that's like not owned by a major production house.
We consider indies anything that's not Marvel and DC.
And I think that's like 80% of people. I think that's like a majority of people who define indies is like anything that's not the big two. But yeah, I mean, I need to get caught up on this. The only thing I don't really like about the current Transformers run is the art. Like, I'm not a big fan of the art on the current Transformers run.
Yeah. The whole Energon universe they're doing right now.
I mean, I read the first issue. I don't know how far reaching it is. But I know that, like, what is it? Witches by Scott Snyder. That's one of my favorite indies. On my list, when I was actually at OAX, I was talking to Clay Mann and to Sean Murphy. Right, we were just kind of like hanging out and talking for a while. And Sean Murphy was asking me, like, have you read like Southern Bastards or like God's Country or anything like that? And I was like, no. He's like, you need to absolutely go and read those. Like, they're phenomenal. So yeah, I got to check those out. I do have them on my list. I just haven't really gotten around to reading them. So
Pericles Dragon Balls wants to know, any thoughts on Blood Hunt, aka we have DC versus vampires at home?
I have not. I've never heard of that.
So Blood Hunt's the new crossover storyline that's coming out with Dracula and the vampires. Blade is going to be a central figure of it. I think Bloodline is going to be a part of it.
I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, here's my question to you: do you think they're going to do like the whole blood, like the daughter of Blade? Do you think they're going to do her in the MCU?
Yes,
You
absolutely.
think that's why she's getting like so much promotion?
Yes,
she got her own miniseries.
yes, absolutely. I think it's already been confirmed that there is a young woman who's attached to the Blade film, and that's what led to a lot of the reshoots and rewriting and what have you. But yes, I absolutely believe they're going to introduce Bloodline into the MCU. I think they're trying to establish the next generation with sort of a young Avengers type thing. I think we got that at the end of Marvels, right?
Yeah,
where they're trying to tie these characters together and do this next generation of characters.
So here's my question: you know how like in the more recent, before Gang War, in the Miles Morales, you had like that couple issues where he crossed over with like Blade's daughter.
Yeah.
Him and Blade. Do you think they're going to end up doing more like team ups or potentially like a romantic thing between like Miles?
I hope not, because it's not that I have. I'm actually a big proponent of Black Super Love.
I was like, are you a Miles and Gwen fan? Because I've
you can't see it, but I'm a Miles and Starling fan. You can't see it, can you?
Yeah, I can't see that at all. Yeah, I was like, I can't see any of that.
It's Miles Morales Spider-Man #6. I'm a big fan of Miles and Starling. They're kind of the only, for all intents and purposes, they're the only Black super love couple in mainstream comics in an ongoing series right now.
Really?
They're literally the only ones.
See, I was a big fan of like Miles and Spider-Gwen. I always wanted to see Miles and Spider-Gwen. Like I've been a fan of
that's ultimately probably going to happen simply because everything that's in the movies or MCU
Spider-Verse
is what happens in the comics eventually.
But I mean, technically it already did. They did the whole like kissing in a tree story arc between Miles and Spider-Gwen.
But I think by the time the next movie comes out, Starling will probably be moved out the picture somehow. Either she'll get killed or break up with him or something, so they can introduce Spider-Gwen as his new love interest in the comics to tie into what. Because comics today, in my opinion, are really. It used to be the source material for the MCU, and I think at this point it's kind of switched now that Marvel Studios kind of runs Marvel Comics, and Marvel Comics are basically the promotional materials for the MCU.
In a lot of ways, they are. I've been saying that for a long time. In fact, even if you go now and look at what's happening with like Ultimates and all that kind of stuff, that you have like an older Spider-Man. Black Panther feels more like Ultimate Black Panther. I'm sorry, more like MCU Black Panther. At least Chadwick Boseman, that kind of thing. Here's my question: What do you think about the first issue of Black Panther? Of Ultimate
Black Panther?
Yeah,
I loved it. I loved it. Yeah. Well, here's the reason I loved it. Because of what I mentioned before, where over the last 8 years or so, we've had the deconstruction of the Black Panther.
Yeah. This
was a return to what, because I'm a long-term Black Panther fan. I'm talking 90s, right? What old-time Black Panther fans want is him being him being the Black Panther, him being the king, him being the alpha dog male character that he has been made over the last 30 years. And that has not happened for quite some time. We've, as fans, really been kind of waiting for him to come back to being himself, where he is the king and he's the superhero and he's confident and he knows what he's doing. We actually haven't had that in comics in a long time. So the Ultimate Black Panther was a return to that. And in fact, I'll go one further and say, after the run, you didn't read the John Ridley run, but after that run, people were really upset with the end of that run and hoped that Dr. Ewing's run would basically ignore that run or do a quick reboot or reset or fix those things quickly. And she had 10 issues. And that when that didn't happen immediately in a fast fix, people became very upset. So when it was a perfect timing thing, because within the week that people started to realize there wasn't going to be a Black Panther 11, that her run was going to end. is the same time Ultimate Black Panther #1 came out, and it was everything that Black Panther fans had been looking for. So I think that really helped boost the popularity of that particular issue, because people are like, that's the guy we've been waiting for. If you're an MCU fan and you were to pick up the last couple runs of Black Panther, you would have been lost. Like, who's this guy? This is not like the guy I saw in the movies. But if you pick up the Ultimate Black Panther one, you'd be like, yeah, it's more consistent with what I recall.
See, I don't know. I think it depends, right? If we're talking about like the 1998 Christopher Priest run, and it's the Black Panther who's like, just so you guys know, number one, I joined the Avengers just to spy on you and make sure you weren't a threat to Wakanda. And number two, I will let the world burn before I let anything happen to Wakanda. Right? Like,
yeah, that's my Black Panther. That's my guy.
Is it okay? That one I feel like was more synonymous with Black Panther as he was introduced in Civil War. In terms of T'Challa, as far as how he felt by the end of the first Black Panther movie, I don't think he felt that way. Like I didn't get that kind of feel from him. I didn't get that vibe from him. You know,
there are many people that don't believe that we have had an accurate representation of Black Panther in the MCU yet. With the exception, I would say, personally, I think the version that we got in Captain America Civil War is a different version than what we got in the Black Panther film. The Civil War version was more, I think, consistent with what you had in the comics, because that Black Panther was had a little bit more of an edge to him, the way the Russo brothers portrayed him. He had a little bit more mystery to him. A little bit more abrasive, a little bit more dangerous, I think is the word I'm looking for, than what you saw in the actual Black Panther film. That he
felt more ruthless and more
right. And I think that's more consistent with what a lot of Black Panther fans from the comics are used to seeing in that character.
See, to a degree, I think that's true. But the only thing that I think that really separates Black Panther from the one that we saw in Civil War to the one that's more comic book accurate is his intelligence. Because as smart as Shuri is, that level of intelligence that Shuri has, that's T'Challa in the comics.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely.
Like in the comics, I mean, Shuri's capable. And one of the things that I actually really loved about her character is when they established after Doom War, right? Like when she became the new Black Panther. From that point going forward into Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, especially during Infinity, and then like the actual fall of Wakanda and Avengers and New Avengers, Shuri was depicted as being reckless, being hot-headed, like quick on the temper, and like she was super quick to go to war, which I love that about her. Like I loved that about her character, that she was far less methodical, she was far less patient than T'Challa traditionally was. And she was really, she felt more like I'm going to give the people what they want, right? If people want to go to war, let's go to war, right? And just immediately like attacks the Atlanteans, like goes to war against the Atlanteans, and it's this huge massacre.
The closest we got of Shuri like that in the MCU was the scene in Wakanda Forever where she first got her powers and she encounters M'Baku in that cave. And he's talking to her about, what do you want to do next? And she's like, let's go to war with Atlantis. And he's like, I don't know if I want to do that. And she was very forceful. He's like, we're going to war. And you're either with me or against me, or said something to that. Like, that was pretty reminiscent to the Shuri that you saw in the comics during that Doom War time period.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of mixed feelings about Wakanda Forever. Yeah.
Oh, I have a lot of very strong feelings about Wakanda Forever. And not most of them are not good.
Yeah, like I'm kind of in that. Like one of the things I didn't like about Wakanda Forever, one of the things I didn't like is it doesn't make any sense that Shuri would get the powers of the Black Panther and then suddenly just become this martial arts expert. Like it doesn't make any sense. Like what they should have done is they should have said, like when she met with Eric Killmonger, right? Like even if she's like, I don't agree with your politics, that she would have been like, but you can train me how to fight because you know how to fight. And like he trains her. And so like she comes out because it all takes place in the mindscape. Time has no meaning there.
Time has no meaning. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so she comes out, she's like, okay, cool. So like basically I matrixed this, right? Like I know Kung Fu, right? And just like has it all uploaded to her brain.
And there's a comics basis for that because it's been portrayed in the comics that sometimes the Black Panther can learn from his ancestors, right?
Yes.
They can learn what, I mean, T'Challa, his present power set comes from Bast herself, where he's supposed to be able to have all the knowledge of the prior Black Panthers. They could have done something like that in the film and said she basically got a download from a prior Black Panther.
Yeah, that was a big thing when they introduced the Necropolis, and they were like, you know, he can now go and communicate with like former Black Panthers and talk to them.
Right.
Right. Because
Exactly.
prior to that, it was just kind of like, you know, I feel my ancestors with, you know, and that kind of thing. But now it's just like, no, man, like they're all over here and they're all telling you you're making a series of bad decisions. So like, don't do that. But no, like that was one of the things that I wasn't the biggest fan of. I feel like it should have been like Wakanda Forever should have been Doom War. It should have been one of these things where like Shuri is like, where they're like, okay, I'm going to make sure like Shuri is announced to be the new Black Panther. And like, there's a nationalist uprising where they're like, no. That's not going to happen, right? Like Shuri, like the Black Panther role has historically been men, right? And this is the idea of like conservative nationalist viewpoints versus more progressive viewpoints, and it leads to them being just like ran out of the country, right? And somebody
Rob,
manages.
do you know how many videos we've done on this subject where I've said the exact same thing that you just said?
Yeah, I mean that's yeah, and then at the end, right? Like by whatever manner, right? I mean, because what I would have done is this, right? I would have said, okay, I would have said like, do it as Doom War. You don't know it's Doctor Doom until the end, but do it as Doom War and just pitch the movie where it's just like, so Chadwick Boseman passed away in real life, which means T'Challa dies in the movie. Shuri's like, I'm the new Black Panther. There's just this massive revolt against Shuri for whatever reason we want to use to make.
Well, he doesn't die in Doom War. That's the best part.
No. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying just for the sake of this, because Chadwick Boseman passed away, like we don't recast.
How they could have done it is if at the beginning of Doom War, the plane flies in, it crashes, and he's all burnt to a crisp.
Yeah.
Right? So they could have said, well, here's T'Challa, he's in this stasis cube, which is in the comic, and he's all burnt up to a crisp, and they're trying to rehabilitate him. It looks like he's gonna die. And we need a new Black Panther, and you follow the rest of the story. Then when the rest of the story ends, well, we're able to bring him back, but he doesn't look the same because he got all burnt up. So now there's a new actor. Retcon. There you go.
Yeah, that's an option. That's an option, right? Yeah, I mean that's why I say like the one of the greatest things about the Black Panther films is they're all about kind of making a statement, right? Whether it is social and political commentary about the modern era, or it's simply just focusing and highlighting Black excellence and Black culture itself, right? So yeah, all I would do is I would have just and granted, I guess they couldn't necessarily done this because like they had to write this movie in like a rush, right? They had to write it just like over a weekend, essentially, right? I mean, it was just a mad dash. So, but what I would have done is I would have said, okay, so like Shuri becomes the new Black Panther. She's rejected by a nationalist movement, which basically overthrows the Wakandan government, she's forced to flee. And then somehow maybe she gets a heart-shaped herb, however, right? They smuggle one out, whatever it is. And then she's taken to some safe place, right? And you get to kind of see what's going on in Wakanda with this new, you know, and you get that whole plot. But basically with Shuri, she takes the heart-shaped herb. She goes through like the whole process where she's buried and all that kind of stuff. And she communicates with like Eric Killmonger. And on one hand, she's torn because she's like, my brother was a servant of the people of Wakanda. And if the people of Wakanda don't want me as their queen, is it truly my place to take that? You know, and in effect, like the person she sees, like in talking to Eric Killmonger, he's like, there are things that I learned from your brother that I didn't realize were important until those final moments of my life. And his time in the afterlife, while he still holds somewhat of a militant view, his views have also kind of changed to a degree. And what he effectively tells her is, if they won't listen, make them listen. And so it kind of like instills this renewed vigor. And then alongside training she gets from Eric Killmonger, she comes out as like the Black Panther, like the new Black Panther. And it's kind of an in-movie statement to the movie-going audience who questioned whether or not she would be effective, that it's like, yes, right? It's the equivalent of Bendis' Spider-Man 2, when Peter Parker from the main Marvel Universe is like, I give you my blessing, Miles, right? And it's just Bendis' way of telling all the Miles naysayers to shut up because he's not going anywhere. And so like she shows up back in Wakanda, right? Just like in some action, just like puts silence to, you know, this whole movement. And it's like, I am now your queen of Wakanda, right? Like, I will honor you as a queen and I will rule this country righteously and fairly. But if you stand in my way or try to take me out, I will do it exactly what my brother would have done, right? And then like has the leaders of the nationalist movement, either they're like executed as a display of power, or maybe as a display, or maybe like as a display of like, honor or compassion or whatever. Like she lets them live, right? Whatever it is.
In a Disney movie?
I mean, I'm just saying, man.
I don't disagree, bro. I don't disagree. I love it.
Yeah.
Someone here, you're a natural born storyteller. That's absolute facts, man.
Yeah.
So look, man, it's been a pleasure having you on here, and I appreciate it. I won't take up all your time. We've been here for 2 hours, and I could be here for the next 2 more hours talking to you about comics and stuff. But I really wanted to thank you for sharing time with us. You're welcome back anytime. For those of you who may have joined us late, this is Rob Jefferson of Comics Explained. Please check out his YouTube channel, subscribe to his channel, and give likes. He does brilliant videos. Check out all the videos he's done. He does them. How many times a week do you do videos?
5 to 6.
5 to 6 times a week. He's constantly dropping content on comics. If you want to learn about characters, search for them. As he says in his byline, he'll make you an expert in comics in 30 minutes or less. Yeah, he stands by his word.
I do.
Appreciate you, man.
Thanks for having me on.
This, huh?
I said, thanks for having me on, man. It was awesome.
Oh, man, it was a blessing. I appreciate having you. Please give a like to this video. Share it. If you're not subscribed to our channel and you dig what we're putting out, please subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell and share it on your social media. We appreciate you. All right, Derek, let's take us out. Black Comic Lords, we got you. And I think